The Categories by Aristotle. Translated by E. M. Edgell. Section 1. Part 1. Things are said to be named equivocally when, though they have a common name, the definition corresponding with the name differs for each. Thus, a real man and a figure in a picture can both lay claim to the name animal, yet these are equivocally so named. For, though they have a common name, the definition corresponding with the name differs for each. Or should any one define in what sense each is an animal, his definition in the one case will be appropriate to that case only. On the other hand, things are said to be named univocally, which have both the name and the definition answering to the name in common. A man and an ox are both animal, and these are univocally so named, inasmuch as not only the name, but also the definition, is the same in both cases. For if a man should state in what sense each is an animal, the statement in the one case would be identical with that in the other. Things are said to be named derivatively, which derive their name from some other name, but differ from it in termination. Thus, the grammarian derives his name from the word grammar, and the courageous man from the word courage. Part 2. Forms of speech are either simple or composite. Examples of the latter are such expressions as the man runs, the man wins. Of the former, man, ox, runs, wins. Of things themselves, some are predicable of a subject, and are never present in a subject. Thus man is predicable of the individual man, and is never present in a subject. By being present in a subject, I do not mean present as parts are present in a whole, but being incapable of existence apart from the said subject. Some things, again, are present in a subject, but are never predicable of a subject. For instance, a certain point of grammatical knowledge is present in the mind, but is not predicable of any subject. Or again, a certain whiteness may be present in the body, for color requires a material basis, yet it is never predicable of anything. Other things, again, are both predicable of a subject and present in a subject. Thus, while knowledge is present in the human mind, it is predicable of grammar. There is, lastly, a class of things which are neither present in a subject nor predicable of a subject, such as the individual man or the individual horse. But, to speak more generally, that which is individual and has the character of a unit is never predicable of a subject. Yet in some cases there is nothing to prevent such being present in a subject. Thus a certain point of grammatical knowledge is present in a subject. Part 3. When one thing is predicated of another, all that which is predicable of the predicate will be predicable also of the subject. Thus, man is predicated of the individual man, but animal is predicated of man. It will, therefore, be predicable of the individual man also. For the individual man is both man and animal. If genera are different and coordinate, their differentiae are themselves different in kind. Take, as an instance, the genus animal and the genus knowledge. With feet, two-footed, winged, aquatic are differentiae of animal. The species of knowledge are not distinguished by the same differentiae. One species of knowledge does not differ from another in being two-footed. But where one genus is subordinate to another, there is nothing to prevent their having the same differentiae. For the greater class is predicated of the lesser, so that all the differentiae of the predicate will be differentiae also of the subject. Part 4. Expressions which are in no way composite signify substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, or affection. To sketch my meaning roughly, examples of substance are man, or the horse, of quantity, such terms as 2 cubits long, or 3 cubits long, of quality, such attributes as white, grammatical. Double half greater fall under the category of relation, in the marketplace, in the lyceum, under that of place, yesterday, last year, under that of time. Lying, sitting are terms indicating position, shod, armed, state, to lance, to cauterize, action, to be lanced, to be cauterized, affection. No one of these terms, in and by itself, involves an affirmation. It is by the combination of such terms that positive or negative statements arise. For every assertion must, as is admitted, be either true or false, whereas expressions which are not in any way composite, such as man, white, runs, wins, cannot be either true or false. Part 5. Substance, in the truest and primary and most definite sense of the word, is that which is neither predicable of a subject, nor present in a subject. For instance, the individual man or horse. But in a secondary sense, those things are called substances within which, as species, the primary substances are included. Also those which, as genre, include the species. For instance, the individual man is included in the species man, and the genus to which the species belongs is animal. These, therefore, that is to say, the species man and the genus animal, are termed secondary substances. It is plain from what has been said that both the name and the definition of the predicate must be predicable of the subject. For instance, man is predicated of the individual man. Now, in this case, the name of the species man is applied to the individual, for we use the term man in describing the individual, and the definition of man will also be predicated of the individual man, for the individual man is both man and animal. Thus, both the name and the definition of the species are predicable of the individual. With regard, on the other hand, to those things which are present in a subject, it is generally the case that neither their name nor their definition is predicable of that in which they are present. Though, however, the definition is never predicable, there is nothing in certain cases to prevent the name being used. For instance, white, being present in a body, is predicated of that in which it is present, for a body is called white. The definition, however, of the color white is never predicable of the body. Everything except primary substances is either predicable of a primary substance or present in a primary substance. This becomes evident by reference to particular instances which occur. Animal is predicated of the species man, therefore of the individual man. For if there were no individual man of whom it could be predicated, it could not be predicated of the species man at all. Again, color is present in body, therefore in individual bodies, for if there were no individual body in which it was present, it could not be present in body at all. Thus, everything except primary substances is either predicated of primary substances, or is present in them. And if these last did not exist, it would be impossible for anything else to exist. Of secondary substances, the species is more truly substance than the genus, being more nearly related to primary substance. For if any one should render an account of what a primary substance is, he would render a more instructive account, and one more proper to the subject, by stating the species than by stating the genus. Thus, he would give a more instructive account of an individual by stating that he was a man than by stating that he was an animal. For the former description is too peculiar to the individual in a greater degree, while the latter is too general. Again, the man who gives an account of the nature of an individual tree will give a more instructive account by mentioning the species tree than by mentioning the genus plant. Moreover, primary substances are most properly called substances in virtue of the fact that they are the entities which underlie everything else, and that everything else is either predicated of them or present in them. Now, the same relation which subsists between primary substance and everything else subsists also between the species and the genus, for the species is to the genus as subject is to predicate, since the genus is predicated of the species, whereas the species cannot be predicated of the genus. Thus we have a second ground for asserting that the species is more truly substance than the genus. Of species themselves, except in the case of such as are genera, no one is more truly substance than another. We should not give a more appropriate account of the individual man by stating the species to which he belonged than we should of an individual horse by adopting the same method of definition. In the same way, of primary substances, no one is more truly substance than another. An individual man is not more truly substance than an individual ox. It is, then, with good reason, that of all that remains, when we exclude primary substances, we concede to species and genera alone the name secondary substance. For these alone, of all the predicates, convey a knowledge of primary substance. For it is by stating the species or the genus that we appropriately define any individual man, and we shall make our definition more exact by stating the former than by stating the latter. All other things that we state, such as that he is white, that he runs, and so on, are irrelevant to the definition. Thus, it is just that these alone, apart from primary substances, should be called substances. Further, primary substances are most properly so called, because they underlie and are the subjects of everything else. Now, the same relation that subsists between primary substance and everything else subsists also between the species and the genus to which the primary substance belongs, on the one hand, and every attribute which is not included within these, on the other. For these are the subjects of all such. If we call an individual man skilled in grammar, the predicate is applicable also to the species and to the genus to which he belongs. This law holds good in all cases. It is a common characteristic of all substance that it is never present in a subject, for primary substance is neither present in a subject nor predicated of a subject, while with regards to secondary substances, it is clear from the following arguments, apart from others, that they are not present in a subject. For man is predicated of the individual man, but is not present in any subject. For manhood is not present in the individual man. In the same way, animal is also predicated of the individual man, but is not present in him. Again, when a thing is present in a subject, though the name may quite well be applied to that in which it is present, the definition cannot be applied. Yet, of secondary substances, not only the name, but also the definition, applies to the subject. We should use both the definition of the species and that of the genus with reference to the individual man. Thus, substance cannot be present in a subject. Yet this is not peculiar to substance, for it is also the case that differentiae cannot be present in subjects. The characteristics terrestrial and two-footed are predicated of the species man, but not present in it, for they are not in man. Moreover, the definition of the differentia may be predicated of that of which the differentia itself is predicated. For instance, if the characteristic terrestrial is predicated of the species man, the definition also of that characteristic may be used to form the predicate of the species man, for man is terrestrial. The fact that the parts of substances appear to be present in the whole, as in a subject, should not make us apprehensive, lest we should have to admit that such parts are not substances. For in explaining the phrase, being present in a subject, we stated that we meant otherwise than as parts in a whole. It is the mark of substances and of differentiae that, in all propositions of which they form the predicate, they are predicated univocally. For all such propositions have for their subject either the individual or the species. It is true that, inasmuch as primary substance is not predicable of anything, it can never form the predicate of any proposition. But of secondary substances, the genus both of the species and of the individual. Similarly, the differentiae are predicated of the species and of the individuals. Moreover, the definition of the species and that of the genus are applicable to the primary substance, and that of the genus to the species. For all that is predicated of the predicate will be predicated also of the subject. Similarly, the definition of the differentiae will be applicable to the species and to the individuals. But it was stated above that the word univocal was applied to those things, which had both name and definition in common. It is, therefore, established that in every proposition of which either substance or a differentia forms the predicate, these are predicated univocally. All substance appears to signify that which is individual. In the case of primary substance, this is indisputably true, for the thing is a unit. In the case of secondary substances, when we speak, for instance, of man or animal, our form of speech gives the impression that we are here also indicating that which is individual. But the impression is not strictly true, for a secondary substance is not an individual, but a class with a certain qualification, for it is not one and single as a primary substance. The words man, animal, are predicable of more than one subject. Yet species and genus do not merely indicate quality, like the term white. White indicates quality and nothing further. But species and genus determine the quality with reference to a substance. They signify substance qualitatively differentiated. The determinate qualification covers a larger field in the case of the genus than in that of the species. He who uses the word animal is herein using a word of wider extension than he who uses the word man. Another mark of substance is that it has no contrary. What could be contrary of any primary substance, such as the individual man or animal? It has none, nor can the species or the genus have a contrary. Yet this characteristic is not peculiar to substance, but is true of many other things, such as quantity. There is nothing that forms the contrary of 2 cubits long, or of 3 cubits long, or of 10, or of any such term. A man may contend that much is the contrary of little, or great of small, but of definite quantitative terms, no contrary exists. Substance, again, does not appear to admit of variation of degree. I do not mean by this that one substance cannot be more or less truly substance than another, for it has already been stated that this is the case, but that no single substance admits of varying degrees within itself. For instance, one particular substance, man, cannot be more or less man, either than himself at some other time, or than some other man. One man cannot be more man than another, as that which is white may be more or less white than some other white object, or as that which is beautiful may be more or less beautiful than some other beautiful object. The same quality, moreover, is said to subsist in a thing in varying degrees, at different times. A body, being white, is said to be whiter at one time than it was before, or being warm, is said to be warmer or less warm than at some other time. But substance is not said to be more or less that which it is. A man is not more truly a man at one time than he was before, or is anything, if it is substance, more or less what it is. Substance, then, does not admit of variation of degree. The most distinctive mark of substance appears to be that, while remaining numerically one and the same, it is capable of admitting contrary qualities. From among things other than substance, we should find ourselves unable to bring forward any which possessed this mark. Thus, one and the same color cannot be white and black, nor can the same one action be good and bad. This law holds good for everything that is not substance. But one and the selfsame substance, while retaining its identity, is yet capable of admitting contrary qualities. The same individual person is at one time white, at another black, at one time warm, at another cold, at one time good, at another bad. This capacity is found nowhere else, though it might be maintained that a statement or opinion was an exception to the rule. The same statement, it is agreed, can both be true and false. For if the statement "he is sitting" is true, yet when the person in question has risen, the same statement will be false. The same applies to opinions, for if anyone thinks truly that a person is sitting, yet, when the person has risen, this same opinion, if still held, will be false. Yet although this exception may be allowed, there is, nevertheless, a difference in the manner in which the thing takes place. It is by themselves changing that substances admit contrary qualities. It is thus that which was hot becomes cold, for it has entered into a different state. Similarly, that which was white becomes black, and that which was bad, good, by a process of change. And in the same way, in all other cases, it is by changing that substances are capable of admitting contrary qualities. But statements and opinions themselves remain unaltered in all respects. It is by the alteration in the facts of the case that the contrary quality comes to be theirs. The statement, "he is sitting," remains unaltered, but it is at one time true, at another false, according to circumstances. What has been said of statements applies also to opinions. Thus, in respect of the manner in which the thing takes place, it is the peculiar mark of substance that it should be capable of admitting contrary qualities, for it is by itself changing that it does so. If then a man should make this exception and contend that statements and opinions are capable of admitting contrary qualities, his contention is unsound. For statements and opinions are said to have this capacity, not because they themselves undergo modification, but because this modification occurs in the case of something else. The truth or falsity of a statement depends on facts, and not on any power on the part of the statement itself of admitting contrary qualities. In short, there is nothing which can alter the nature of statements and opinions. As, then, no change takes place in themselves, these cannot be said to be capable of admitting contrary qualities. But it is by reason of the modification which takes place within the substance itself that a substance is said to be capable of admitting contrary qualities. For a substance admits within itself either disease or health, whiteness or blackness. It is in this sense that it is said to be capable of admitting contrary qualities. To sum up, it is a distinctive mark of substance that, while remaining numerically one and the same, it is capable of admitting contrary qualities, the modification taking place through a change in the substance itself. Let these remarks suffice on the subject of substance. Part 6. Quantity is either discrete or continuous. Moreover, some quantities are such that each part of the whole has a relative position to the other parts. Others have within them no such relation of part to part. Instances of discrete quantities are number and speech, of continuous lines, surfaces, solids, and besides these, time and place. In the case of the parts of a number, there is no common boundary at which they join. For example, 2 5s make 10, but the 2 5s have no common boundary, but are separate. The parts 3 and 7 also do not join at any boundary. Nor, to generalize, would it ever be possible in the case of number that there should be a common boundary among the parts. They are always separate. Number, therefore, is a discrete quantity. The same is true of speech. That speech is a quantity is evident, for it is measured in long and short syllables. I mean here that speech which is vocal. Moreover, it is a discrete quantity, for its parts have no common boundary. There is no common boundary at which the syllables join, but each is separate and distinct from the rest. A line, on the other hand, is a continuous quantity, for it is possible to find a common boundary at which its parts join. In the case of a line, this common boundary is the point. In the case of the plane, it is the line. For the parts of the plane have also a common boundary. Similarly, you can find a common boundary in the case of the parts of a solid, namely, either a line or a plane. Space and time also belong to this class of quantities. Time, past, present, and future, forms a continuous whole. Space, likewise, is a continuous quantity, for the parts of a solid occupy a certain space, and these have a common boundary. It follows that the parts of space also, which are occupied by the parts of the solid, have the same common boundary as the parts of the solid. Thus, not only time, but space also is a continuous quantity, for its parts have a common boundary. Quantities consist either of parts, which bear a relative position each to each, or of parts which do not. The parts of a line bear a relative position to each other, for each lies somewhere, and it would be possible to distinguish each, and to state the position of each on the plane, and to explain to what sort of part among the rest each was contiguous. Similarly, the parts of a plane have position, for it could similarly be stated what was the position of each and what sort of parts were contiguous. The same is true with regard to the solid and to space. But it would be impossible to show that the parts of a number had a relative position each to each, or a particular position, or to state what parts were contiguous. Nor could this be done in the case of time, for none of the parts of time has an abiding existence, and that which does not abide can hardly have position. It would be better to say that such parts had a relative order, in virtue of one being prior to another. Similarly, with number, in counting 1 is prior to 2, and 2 to 3, and thus the parts of a number may be said to possess a relative order, though it would be impossible to discover any distinct position for each. This holds good also in the case of speech. None of its parts has an abiding existence. When once a syllable is pronounced, it is not possible to retain it, so that, naturally, as the parts do not abide, they cannot have position. Thus, some quantities consist of parts which have position, and some of those which have not. Strictly speaking, only the things which I have mentioned belong to the category of quantity. Everything else that is called quantitative is a quantity in a secondary sense. It is because we have in mind some one of these quantities, properly so called, that we apply quantitative terms to other things. We speak of what is white as large, because the surface over which the white extends is large. We speak of an action or a process as lengthy, because the time covered is long. These things cannot in their own right claim the quantitative epithet. For instance, should anyone explain how long an action was, his statement would be made in terms of the time taken, to the effect that it lasted a year or something of that sort. In the same way, he would explain the size of a white object in terms of surface, for he would state the area which it covered. Thus, the things already mentioned, and these alone, are in their intrinsic nature quantities. Nothing else can claim the name in its own right, but, if at all, only in a secondary sense. Quantities have no contraries. In the case of definite quantities, this is obvious. Thus, there is nothing that is the contrary of 2 cubits long, or of 3 cubits long, or of a surface, or of any such quantities. A man might indeed argue that much was the contrary of little, and great of small, but these are not quantitative, but relative. Things are not great or small absolutely. They are so called rather as the result of an act of comparison. For instance, a mountain is called small, a grain large, and virtue of the fact that the latter is greater than others of its kind, the former less. Thus there is a reference here to an external standard. For if the terms great and small were used absolutely, a mountain would never be called small or a grain large. Again, we say that there are many people in a village and few in Athens, although those in the city are many times as numerous as those in the village. Or we say that a house has many in it, and a theater few, though those in the theater far outnumber those in the house. The terms 2 cubits long, 3 cubits long, and so on indicate quantity. The terms great and small indicate relation, for they have reference to an external standard. It is, therefore, plain that these are to be classed as relative. Again, whether we define them as quantitative or not, they have no contraries. For how can there be a contrary of an attribute, which is not to be apprehended in or by itself, but only by reference to something external? Again, if great and small are contraries, it will come about that the same object can admit contrary qualities at one and the same time, and that things will themselves be contrary to themselves. For it happens at times that the same thing is both small and great. For the same thing may be small in comparison with one thing, and great in comparison with another, so that the same thing comes to be both small and great at one and the same time, and is of such a nature as to admit contrary qualities at one and the same moment. Yet it is agreed, when substance was being discussed, that nothing admits contrary qualities at one and the same moment. For though substance is capable of admitting contrary qualities, yet no one is at the same time both sick and healthy. Nothing is at the same time both white and black, nor is there anything which is qualified in contrary ways at one and the same time. Moreover, if these were contraries, they would themselves be contrary to themselves. For if great is the contrary of small, and the same thing is both great and small at the same time, then small or great is the contrary of itself. But this is impossible. The term great, therefore, is not the contrary of the term small, nor much of little. And even though a man should call these terms not relative but quantitative, they would not have contraries. It is in the case of space that quantity most plausibly appears to admit of a contrary. For men define the term above as the contrary of below, when it is the region at the center they mean by below. And this is so, because nothing is farther from the extremities of the universe than the region at the center. Indeed, it seems that in defining contraries of every kind, men have recourse to a spatial metaphor, for they say that those things are contraries which, within the same class, are separated by the greatest possible distance. Quantity does not, it appears, admit a variation of degree. One thing cannot be 2 cubits long in a greater degree than another. Similarly, with regard to number, what is 3 is not more truly 3 than what is 5 is 5, nor is one set of 3 more truly 3 than another set. Again, one period of time is not said to be more truly time than another. Nor is there any other kind of quantity, of all that have been mentioned, with regards to which variation of degree can be predicated. The category of quantity, therefore, does not admit of variation of degree. The most distinctive mark of quantity is that equality and inequality are predicated of it. Each of the aforesaid quantities is said to be equal or unequal. For instance, one solid is said to be equal or unequal to another. Number, too, and time can have these terms applied to them. Indeed, can all those kinds of quantity that have been mentioned. That which is not a quantity can by no means, it would seem, be termed equal or unequal to anything else. One particular disposition or one particular quality, such as whiteness, is by no means compared with another in terms of equality and inequality, but rather in terms of similarity. Thus, it is the distinctive mark of quantity that it can be called equal and unequal. Section 2, Part 7, Those things are called relative, which, being either said to be of something else or related to something else, are explained by reference to that other thing. For instance, the word superior is explained by reference to something else, for it is superiority over something else that it is meant. Similarly, the expression double has this external reference, for it is the double of something else that is meant. So it is with everything else of this kind. There are, moreover, other relatives, e.g., habit, disposition, perception, knowledge, and attitude. The significance of all of these is explained by a reference to something else and in no other way. Thus, a habit is a habit of something, knowledge is knowledge of something, attitude is the attitude of something. So it is with all other relatives that have been mentioned. Those terms, then, are called relative, the nature of which is explained by reference to something else, the preposition of, or some other preposition being used to indicate the relation. Thus, one mountain is called great in comparison with another, for the mountain claims this attribute by comparison with something. Again, that which is called similar must be similar to something else, and all other such attributes have this external reference. It is to be noted that lying and standing and sitting are particular attitudes, but attitude is itself a relative term. To lie, to stand, to be seated, are not themselves attitudes, but take their name from the aforesaid attitudes. It is possible for relatives to have contraries. Thus, virtue has a contrary, vice, these both being relatives. Knowledge, too, has a contrary, ignorance. But this is not the mark of all relatives. Double and triple have no contrary, nor indeed has any such term. It also appears that relatives can admit a variation of degree, for like and unlike, equal and unequal, have the modifications more and less applied to them, and each of these is relative in character, for the terms like and unequal bear a reference to something external. Yet again, it is not every relative term that admits a variation of degree. No term such as double admits of this modification. All relatives have correlatives. By the term slave, we mean the slave of a master. By the term master, the master of a slave. By double, the double of its half. By half, the half of its double. By greater, greater than that which is less. By less, less than that which is greater. So it is with every other relative term, but the case we use to express the correlation differs in some instances. Thus, by knowledge we mean knowledge of the knowable. By the knowable, that which is to be apprehended by knowledge. By perception, perception of the perceptible. By the perceptible, that which is apprehended by perception. Sometimes, however, reciprocity of correlation does not appear to exist. This comes about when a blunder is made, and to that which the relative is related is not accurately stated. If a man states that a wing is necessarily relative to a bird, the connection between these two will not be reciprocal, for it will not be possible to say that a bird is a bird by reason of its wings. The reason is that the original statement was inaccurate, for the wing is not said to be relative to the bird qua bird, since many creatures besides birds have wings, but qua winged creature. If then the statement is made accurate, the connection will be reciprocal, for we can speak of a wing, having reference necessarily to a winged creature, and of a winged creature as being such because of its wings. Occasionally, perhaps, it is necessary to coin words, if no word exists by which a correlation can adequately be explained. If we define a rudder as necessarily having reference to a boat, our definition will not be appropriate, for the rudder does not have this reference to a boat qua boat, as there are boats which have no rudders. Thus we cannot use the terms reciprocally, for the word boat cannot be said to find its explanation in the word rudder, As there is no existing word, our definition would perhaps be more accurate if we coined some word like ruddered as the correlative of rudder. If we express ourselves thus accurately, at any rate the terms are reciprocally connected, for the ruddered thing is ruddered in virtue of its rudder. So it is in all other cases. A head will be more accurately defined as the correlative of that which is headed, than as that of an animal, for the animal does not have a head qua animal, since many animals have no head. Thus we may perhaps most easily comprehend that to which a thing is related, when a name does not exist, if, from that which has a name, we derive a new name, and apply it to that with which the first is reciprocally connected, as in the aforesaid instances, when we derive the word winged from wing, and from runner. All relatives, then, if properly defined, have a correlative. I add this condition because, if that to which they are related is stated as haphazard and not accurately, the two are not found to be interdependent. Let me state what I mean more clearly. Even in the case of acknowledged correlatives, and where names exist for each, there will be no interdependence if one of the two is denoted, not by that name which expresses the correlative notion, but by one of irrelevant significance. The term slave, if defined as related, not to a master, but to a man, or a biped, or anything of that sort, is not reciprocally connected with that in relation to which it is defined, for the statement is not exact. Further, if one thing is said to be correlative with another, and the terminology used is correct, then, though all irrelevant attributes should be removed, and only that one attribute left in virtue of which it was correctly stated to be correlative with that other, that stated correlation will still exist. If the correlative of the slave is said to be the master, then, though all irrelevant attributes of the said master, such as biped, receptive of knowledge, human, should be removed, and the attribute master alone left, the stated correlation existing between him and the slave will remain the same. For it is of a master that a slave is said to be the slave. On the other hand, if of two correlatives one is not correctly termed, then, when all other attributes are removed, and that alone is left in virtue of which it was stated to be correlative, the stated correlation will be found to have disappeared. For suppose the correlative of the slave should be said to be the man, or the correlative of the wing is the bird. If the attribute master be withdrawn from the man, the correlation between the man and the slave will cease to exist. For if the man is not a master, the slave is not a slave. Similarly, if the attribute winged be withdrawn from the bird, the wing will no longer be relative. Or if the so-called correlative is not winged, it follows that the wing has no correlative. Thus it is essential that the correlated terms should be exactly designated. If there is a name existing, the statement will be easy. If not, it is doubtless our duty to construct names. When the terminology is thus correct, it is evident that all correlatives are interdependent. Correlatives are thought to come into existence simultaneously. This is for the most part true, as in the case of the double and the half. The existence of the half necessitates the existence of that of which it is a half. Similarly, the existence of a master necessitates the existence of a slave, and that of a slave implies that of a master. These are merely instances of a general rule. Moreover, they cancel one another, for if there is no double, it follows that there is no half, and vice versa. This rule also applies to all such correlatives. Yet it does not appear to be true in all cases that correlatives come into existence simultaneously. The object of knowledge would appear to exist before knowledge itself, for it is usually the case that we acquire knowledge of objects already existing. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to find a branch of knowledge, the beginning of the existence of which was contemporaneous with that of its object. Again, while the object of knowledge, if it ceases to exist, cancels at the same time the knowledge which was its correlative, the converse of this is not true. It is true that if the object of knowledge does not exist, there can be no knowledge, for there will no longer be anything to know. Yet it is equally true that if knowledge of a certain object does not exist, the object may nevertheless quite well exist. Thus, in the case of the squaring of the circle, if indeed that process is an object of knowledge, though it itself exists as an object of knowledge, yet the knowledge of it has not yet come into existence. Again, if all animals cease to exist, there would be no knowledge, but there might yet be many objects of knowledge. This is likewise the case with regard to perception. For the object of perception is, it appears, prior to the act of perception. If the perceptible is annihilated, perception also will cease to exist. But the annihilation of perception does not cancel the existence of the perceptible. For perception implies a body perceived, and a body in which perception takes place. Now, if that which is perceptible is annihilated, it follows that the body is annihilated, for the body is a perceptible thing. And if the body does not exist, it follows that perception also ceases to exist. Thus, the annihilation of the perceptible involves that of perception. But the annihilation of perception does not involve that of the perceptible. For if the animal is annihilated, it follows that perception also is annihilated, but perceptibles such as body, heat, sweetness, bitterness, and so on, will remain. Again, perception is generated at the same time as the perceiving subject, for it comes into existence at the same time as the animal. But the perceptible surely exists before perception, for fire and water and such elements, out of which the animal is itself composed, exist before the animal is an animal at all, and before perception. Thus it would seem that the perceptible exists before perception. It may be questioned whether it is true that no substance is relative, as seems to be the case, or whether exception is to be made in the case of certain secondary substances. With regard to primary substances, it is quite true that there is no such possibility, for neither wholes nor parts of primary substances are relative. The individual man or ox is not defined with reference to something external. Similarly with the parts, a particular hand or head is not defined as a particular hand or head of a person, but as the hand or head of a particular person. It is true also, for the most part at least, in the case of secondary substances. The species man and the species ox are not defined with reference to anything outside themselves. Wood, again, is only relative insofar as it is someone's property, not insofar as it is wood. It is plain, then, that in the cases mentioned, substance is not relative. But with regard to some secondary substances, there is a difference of opinion. Thus, such terms as head and hand are defined with reference to that of which the things indicated are a part, and so it comes about that these appear to have a relative character. Indeed, if our definition of that which is relative was complete, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to prove that no substance is relative. If, however, our definition was not complete, if those things only are properly called relative in the case of which relation to an external object is a necessary condition of existence, perhaps some explanation of the dilemma may be found. The former definition does indeed apply to all relatives, but the fact that a thing is explained with reference to something else does not make it essentially relative. From this, It is plain that if a man definitely apprehends a relative thing, he will also definitely apprehend that to which it is relative. Indeed, this is self-evident. For if a man knows that some particular thing is relative, assuming that we call that a relative in the case of which relation to something is a necessary condition of existence, he knows that also to which it is related. For if he does not know at all to which it is related, he will not know whether or not it is relative. This is clear, moreover, in particular instances. If a man knows definitely that such and such a thing is double, he will also forthwith know definitely that of which it is the double. For if there is nothing definite of which he knows it to be the double, he does not know at all that it is double. Again, if he knows that a thing is more beautiful, it follows necessarily that he will forthwith definitely know that also than which it is more beautiful. He will not merely know indefinitely that it is more beautiful than something which is less beautiful, for this would be supposition, not knowledge. For if he does not know definitely that than which it is more beautiful, he can no longer claim to know definitely that it is more beautiful than something else which is less beautiful, for it might be that nothing was less beautiful. It is therefore evident that if a man apprehends some relative thing definitely, he necessarily knows that also definitely to which it is related. Now the head, the hand, and such things are substances, and it is possible to know their essential character definitely, but it does not necessarily follow that we should know that to which they are related. It is not possible to know forthwith whose head or hand is meant. Thus, these are not relatives, and, this being the case, it would be true to say that no substance is relative in character. It is perhaps a difficult matter, in such cases, to make a positive statement without more exhaustive examination, but to have raised questions with regard to details is not without advantage. But with that all being said, we have all manner of ways, if you did find yourself enjoying the content, to indeed get more content. And in fact, maybe even contribute to it, maybe even participate in it in a way, whether it is direct or indirect. If you're looking for a direct way, you can always check out our social media. As I say, we have just recently begun to expand into TikTok and BitChute, but there's also Discord, an entire server, the Threefold Edifactory, where I hope to build a community of people who are like-minded as myself, and who have a real appreciation not just for aesthetic, but also for everything that there is to be gleaned insofar as universals from the particulars of media, of the creations of humanity proper, if you find that you might want to do so. Otherwise, we also have X or Twitter, depending on what you prefer to call it, and Instagram. For something that is more indirect, you can always check out Stream Elements as linked below. It will allow you to give us a tip. That's one time. And if you want something that's a little bit more subscriptive, there is Patreon, which is something that not only gives you the opportunity to give a little back, but also get something further in return. You'll be able to have things like ad-free viewing of all material that we put out here, your name in the credits, and hopefully maybe make this into something a little bit more permanent insofar as employment in the future. If you want to give us a little bit more, that starts at, of course, $5. We have the Exponent tier of Patreon, where that was the Proponent, where you can get a number of other goodies in addition to all of the workshop files that go into the productions that we have here at the Threefold Manifold. And if you really, really, really want something even more significant, we have the $20 tier of Ultraponent, by which you can discuss advertisements, be it your own works or maybe even a charity. I thank you all for attending today's works. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I bid that you never miss your opportunity.